All right, welcome everybody to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny Budinsky, and I am your host for today's exciting program. It is a privilege to have Dr. Jerry Bergman with me to speak on the topic of Darwin, Darwinism, and evolution. On today's important program, you are going to learn the truth about Charles Darwin. Now, this is not Dr. Bergman's first time here on the show. He has been a tremendous blessing to this ministry, and I do want to encourage everybody to check out his previous programs with us. You can find the past shows with Jerry here in the description box of this video and also on our official website, standingfortruthministries.com. His previous presentations range from demolishing human evolution, discussing bacteria, viruses, and the Bible. His last show here with us was on the Scopes monkey trial. So make sure to take advantage of all of that important content. Now, before I hand it over to my guest, Jerry here for his presentation, I do want to give him a formal introduction for anybody who might not be familiar with him. Dr. Jerry Bergman has taught biology, genetics, chemistry, biochemistry, anthropology, geology, and microbiology for over 40 years at several colleges and universities, including Bowling Green State University, Medical College of Ohio, where he was a research associate in experimental pathology, and the University of Toledo. He is a graduate of the Medical College of Ohio, Wayne State University in Detroit, the University of Toledo, and Bowling Green State University. He has over 1,300 publications in 12 languages and 40 books and monographs. His books and textbooks that include chapters that he authored are in over 1,800 college libraries in 27 countries. So far, over 80,000 copies of the 60 books and monographs that he has authored or co-authored are in print. In other words, Jerry, you are more than qualified, brother, to be speaking on these topics, and you are truly a fan favorite here on the Standing for Truth platform. So firstly, I want to ask you, how are you doing today, Jerry?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
I appreciate it. Well, I'm excited. I know the audience is as well. We are doing this live as usual. My faithful mods in the chat have links to your books and also your websites where they can see more from you, Jerry. So to the audience, we are doing this live again. We'll be taking some audience questions. So please, as Jerry is giving his presentation tonight, make sure you're sending in those questions. I'll do my best to save them, and we'll interact with them after his presentation here. So Jerry, I'm going to hand the floor over to you, brother. And whenever you're ready, you're good to go.
Okay, I'm ready. Can you see my slides?
Yes. And then maybe one recommendation at the bottom, you'll notice something, a little bar. You can click hide. Yep.
Okay. Now,
I think if you clicked hide there, you might now have to go back to your PowerPoint, which I do see. I think at the, it looks like the StreamYard box is just in the way of the PowerPoint.
Can you send me?
Maybe, yeah, there you go.
Okay, we okay now?
I wonder if you are you able to see that little hide button? If you click that, what happens?
The whole thing disappears.
Okay, then.
Well, the whole thing.
Okay, then we could just leave the bar there then if it.
Yeah, that's.
If it creates an issue. Okay, Jerry, you're good to go.
Okay, talking about the harm that Darwin has caused to society. One motivation for this presentation is I was in a church in Toledo a couple of months ago, and I gave my presentation, and one of the persons there in the church was a teacher, and she taught science. And she said to me, it doesn't matter. God created us. That's okay. We evolve. Doesn't matter either way because God did it, and that's all that's important. And I thought about that, and one thing that bothered me was, but evolution, there's a problem with the evidence behind it. But she didn't quite see that. And of course, I didn't stress that when I was talking to her. But this presentation will help one see that Darwin is not only wrong, Darwinism, but also we now know with a huge amount of detail the harm that Darwinism has done to society. And that's what this presentation is about. I have, by the way, 5 books specifically which cover this topic. And there's my one book, The Dark Side of Charles Darwin, which is the only book that I'm aware of ever published which is on the dark side of Charles Darwin. And there's a couple books that are somewhat critical, but they're written not to be critical, but to be informative relative to his life. So this book is the only book that looks at the dark side of Charles Darwin. And I might start out with something that people will object to, and that's okay. When people hear it and they object, they tend to listen to what else I have to say. And so evil men, there's certainly a lot of evil men in history, certainly Mao and Stalin and so on. Hitler's right at the top of the list. But my conclusion is Charles Darwin. Why? Because his work was very important in influencing Marx, Hitler, Mao, Stalin, and others. And we know this. We know specifically what these individuals were influenced by, the people that influenced them, and also the ideas. For example, Hitler got his ideas from a German scientist by the name of Ernst Haeckel. And Ernst Haeckel, we know, got his ideas from Charles Darwin because they had correspondence in each other. So because they corresponded, we know what they had to say to each other. In fact, Haeckel was a very strong supporter of Adolf. Haeckel was a very strong supporter, of Adolf Hitler, but as well as of Darwin. And of course, later on, once Haeckel picked up the ideas of Darwinism, he spread those ideas to his university faculty, as well as throughout Nazi Germany. Okay. Okay, what the result was of Darwin's influence. And these numbers are estimates, of course, but about 45 million Christian martyrs in the last century occurred alone. And the World Christian Encyclopedia summarizes this. And 45 million, we're talking about a lot of people. And it's broken down, communism, Nazism, and so on, about 167 million. And that doesn't look at the casualties which occurred after the war, people who experienced injuries and it killed them in 10, 20, or 30 years after the war. Millions more, of course, died from disease, famine, and injuries. So it's a lot of people. Okay, what was Darwin's goal? What was he trying to do? He made it very clear that his goal was to develop his theory, and his theory was to replace theism. And he made that very clear. Before Darwin, of course, 99% of all individuals in Europe were creationists and were theists. After Darwin, we see the numbers have almost reversed. Among eminent scientists and so-called intellectuals in society, the vast majority are today atheists. And we know from studying their life history that Darwinism was very important in doing that. So Darwin's goal was to murder God. And he was very aggressively active in trying to convert those he knew. And when he did so, he was proud. I converted so-and-so to my worldview. Well, how do you murder God? Well, you murder God by destroying the reason people believe in him. Why do people believe in God? Okay, they believe in God because the evidence of the creation all around them. And a good example of the antagonism of atheists is, this is a sign someone had on their door: no religious felicitation. It annoys the atheist who lives here. Violators will be subject to ridicule and dissertations on the Big Bang, evolution, by natural selection and superstrings. So that shows in this person's mind how important evolution was in him accepting his atheistic worldview. And we look at the data, it's very clear among the US population when we look at the different religious groups and how many, what percent in this case, accept the evolution of man through natural selection. When we look at that, we find at the top end Buddhist. And of course, the reason for that is because Buddhism is primarily a philosophy. It's not really a religion that we think of in the Judeo-Christian mode. So Buddhism, almost 81% accept evolution. Hindu, 80%. Jewish, 77%. Unaffiliated, 72%. And we can see that a major bulwark against accepting the evolution of human is the Protestants, historically Black Protestant for good reasons, namely that many Protestants are very aware of the importance of Darwinism in pushing racism. Evangelical Protestant, you can see only 24% accept evolution. Mormons, 22%, and Jehovah's Witnesses, 8%. Now, there are many other denominations that one could include, but this is what the people who did the research, this is the groups that they looked at. Okay, the problem is it's obvious that life was designed. You can see that everywhere. And you may not think flies or mosquitoes, etc., are so beautiful, but if you were an entomologist, and I have friends that are entomologists, and they are just amazed at the beauty of insects. And here we see an example of a fly, and look at the design in that creature. Look what he's able to do. If you've ever tried, he or she, whatever, if you ever try to swat a fly, you realize that it ain't easy. They can stop on a dime, fly backwards. It's amazing the agility that they have. It's amazing they can do what they do. Now, unfortunately, they spread disease, but that's, of course, another story. They don't deliberately spread disease. It's just when they spend time walking on germ-infested areas, they can carry those germs to other places. So they're not deliberately doing it. By and large, flies don't cause a problem, except they just fly around us and can be irritating. And there are many, many examples. This is just one that I picked. And Malin Murray O'Hare, when I was in my atheist days, I worked with her. And by the way, she liked everything I wrote, and she published everything I wrote. So she appreciated my work that I was doing back then. And when I was working with her, I asked her, why in the world do we as atheists spend so much time in our journals, etc., talking about evolution? Why don't we talk about the wonders of atheism? She said, well, and these were her words, we know that Darwinism is the doorway to atheism. And I was inspired by her comment, so I use that as the title of my book, which is 350, 80 pages, I guess, which talks about how all these people, and some were at one time prominent Christians, and they became atheists as a result of being exposed to Darwinism. It's pretty obvious if you have another reason which explains where we got, how we got here, when and so on, which is evolution, you, as they say, you put God out of a job. And get a cough drop here. I'm not used to. I spent all day writing. I've had 8 articles accepted in the past couple of weeks, and have to spend a lot of time revising and editing, and that's part of the job of writing. They find things that aren't as clear as they could be, so I have to fix them up. And then on the other hand, science is the doorway to the creator. We find many people, and this entire book covers people who through science, not through the Bible, although the Bible was important later on, but we found through studying science that people recognize that there is a creator by studying science. And this book contains many atheists that were atheists until they studied and thought about science, and then they became, in this case, creationists and Christians. And there's Madeline, who I worked with, and I got along really well with her, but a lot of people didn't. And some of you may have seen when she was on the Tonight Show. And I'll tell you, I have never heard a foul-mouthed person in my entire life as she was. She was foul-mouthed, scatological, if you know what that refers to. And it's just, she wasn't that way with me. Of course, she was business, I guess. And we talked about the business things. But Malin Murray O'Hara went to the Supreme Court, and her case caused prayer and Bible reading to be thrown out of the schools, which is another example of Darwinism. And of course, Marilyn was a Darwinist. And as I mentioned in her magazines, she spent a lot of time pushing Darwinism because she knew it was the doorway to atheism. Okay, so Darwin concluded his theory replaced God and actually was a God. And these are his own words, Darwin's own words. I speak of natural selection as an active power or deity. I mean only the aggregate action and product of natural law, which of course deities create, and indeed natural selection, evolution creates. And that's how they are connected. Okay, Darwin also said, I would give absolutely nothing to the theory of natural selection if it requires miraculous additions at any one stage of descent, which would make my deity, natural selection, superfluous. In other words, he was deliberately trying to replace theism with atheism by his theory of evolution. So if we look at the motive of Darwin and why he did what he did, we can see from a Christian standpoint, his work was clearly antithetical to our work. Peter Bowler, who is a well-known Darwin scholar, he said many leading Darwinists accepted Darwinism purely because they saw it as a means of achieving the destruction of theism and the establishment of naturalism. And so naturalism became a worldview, and we use the term religion for worldviews. And so naturalism is a worldview, i.e. a religion. So when they talk, at least in the States, about the separation of church and state, really, if you think about it, they are, this law is condemning one worldview and supporting the other worldview, which of course is naturalism or evolution. And Darwin's goal was first to convert the scientists, then eventually the population at large will accept his worldview, or i.e. his religion. So when Darwin deduced the theory of natural selection, his goal was to explain the adaptations which people, the world, had previously seen were the handiwork of God. And so he knew, Darwin knew, that he was committing cultural murder by replacing God with natural selection or his theism. And I've published many books which cover this. And this is the book, Hitler and the Nazi Darwinian Worldview. And it is the most popular book that I have published. Very, very popular. And it's the only book that focuses specifically on Hitler's influence of Darwin, how Darwin influenced Hitler and the Nazi movement. And now other books cover that. So this is less unique in some ways. But this book is unique in that it focuses on the importance of the creation worldview. And also it's only on 400 pages, where I have many, many books. I have probably 2,000 books on Hitler and the Nazi movement. And they are sometimes 2 volumes of 5,000 pages. So they're mammoth in size. But in many ways, what I did is read these books and distilled the meat from them. And I ended up with this book, Hitler and the Nazi Darwinian Worldview. So it's well documented. And the other book, How Darwinism Corrodes Morality, I show that abortion, the sexual revolution, etc., were all heavily influenced by Charles Darwin and his ideas. So these are more examples of the harm that he has done in our society. And naturalism, the best example is, and by the way, I have Cosmos on video, and I've watched it probably 5 times now. Just recently, in the past month, And he stresses in the whole series, the cosmos is all that is or ever will be. In other words, we have the universe and that's it. There's no angels, no God, no spirits, just the material universe, and that's it. And he tried to, in his film, of course, give scientific evidence for that, which if you study this issue a lot, you can see that his arguments fail. He still did a good job, and a lot of us admire what he does. He does a good job presenting the material. I think what creationists need to do is do a cosmos from our worldview and get someone like Carl Sagan to host it. I think that could have a great deal of effect. But anyways, materialism is what he was pushing. And genetics has proven the Adam and Eve story in Genesis to be impossible. Without the Adam and Eve story, there would be no original sin. Now, this is an article written by an atheist, by the way. So without the Adam and Eve story, there'd be no original sin. Without original sin, there'd be no need for Jesus. Without Jesus, the Christian religion falls apart completely. And that shows the importance of theism and the importance of evolution in destroying theism. And this was written by an atheist who was basically saying, look, you prove Adam and Eve story in Genesis wrong, the whole worldview collapses. And what is left is the materialistic worldview. Okay, moving on. Was Darwin successful? Well, pre-Darwin, I mentioned, 99, some say 99.99%, or the vast majority of all scientists and naturalists, or I should say, not naturalists specifically, but those who were studying nature, those who were interested in animals and life and so on. But this group of people, 99% were theists and creationists. Post-Darwin, the AAAS, the leading scientific society, found close to 99% were evolutionists and functional atheists. Functional atheist means that the person's life is driven and focused on no God. In other words, most evolutionists that I know don't go around saying, I'm an atheist. Well, I'm an atheist. And some do, but most don't. But they live their life as if there is no God. And that's what we call functional atheists. And that's what many of the scientists are, is functional atheists. And is religion good or bad? Now, the yellow means that the population of that culture believes that religion has a positive impact. And you can see Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and so on. A large percent of the population believes that religion, theism specifically, has a positive impact. And then religion has a negative impact. We can see at the bottom here in Sweden. So 80% of the Swedish people believe that religion has a negative impact. Belgium, France, Spain, and so on, the same thing. So we can see that this worldview has a particular influence in Western countries. Some exceptions, Japan's an exception, and so on, but primarily most of these countries are Western countries, and therefore Western countries which has embraced evolution and Darwinism has concluded that, believe that religion has a negative impact in society. Okay, moving on. Let's see. Mistake here.
I think if you double click your current slide, it should put you right back into full screen, Jerry.
Okay, I'm doing that.
Okay, maybe at the top. I'm just if you
sure
click
how that happened, but
if you click slideshow
okay.
and then click not from
current slide.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. Okay, the implications for us. This is, let's see if that's, that's where we're okay. Implications for us. This is a book done by Ken Ham and Brett Beamer. Brett Beamer was a professional person who surveys. He ran a survey organization, and he found about, now these estimates are difficult because we're looking at one stage in their life. He found 2/3 of children reared in the theologically conservative churches walk away from the church, many from Christianity altogether. Now, some, we should mention, come back because they walk away from the church. Later on, they grow up, they have family, they have kids, and then they realize that, a church upbringing can be very important in their life. And so that number is not, but on the other hand, it clearly points out the fact that you need to help people find the right way to live right in life. You need to have a Christian background. Okay, so Darwin's theory provided a naturalistic account of the origin of all life species. So it was an explanation, basically, and this is a quote from a scientist. It was an explanation, Darwin's theory, for design without a designer. So basically, that was what Darwin was trying to do. Now, it actually is design by natural selection. So there is a designer, but the designer is natural selection, which is the weak die and the stronger are more apt to live. Okay, and Darwin knew if evolution by descent were true, then the argument from design was dead. Okay, and therefore, that's why he pushed it. And all that went with it, namely God, life after death, moral laws, and ultimate meaning in life. So when one accepts a Darwinian worldview, they basically deny God, life after death, moral laws, and ultimate meaning in life. I'm not saying atheists don't have morals, it's that their morals are very different from ours. Often the atheist morals are push, preserve, protect what is good, namely what feels good and what is good to you, and not necessarily what is good to society. A couple of books that I've written which deal with this. And of course, the main issue is not evolution of all kinds of life, but the major issue is evolution of humans, of man. And this is a book I wrote with Peter Line and Jeffrey Tompkins and Daniel Biddle. We basically showed all of the claimed apes as ancestors to human, all of them have been debunked by other paleontologists. So I have my theory, and then you have yours. I debunk your theory, and I say my theory is better. And then you debunk my theory, and you say your theory is better than my theory. So paleontologists argue among themselves, and so they have successfully demolished all of the competing worldviews that deal with, in this case, human evolution. Now, this doesn't mean that they are going to reject themselves. I realize your view has a problem, but I like my view because I think my view is right. These people, their worldview is atheism, or their worldview is at least human evolution, and therefore they may not fully be able to explain it with their worldview, but nonetheless they strongly believe in the idea that indeed humans evolved. And Fossil Forensics, this is the book where I looked at the fossil record of all basic organisms of plants and mollusks and insects and reptiles and so on, and found in all cases a satisfactory worldview, satisfactory evolutionary worldview does not exist. In other words, they don't have the fossil record to support the evolution of birds, of dogs, of horses, etc. And I go through each category in this book and document, indeed, that the evolutionists themselves admit they don't have evidence for their worldview relative to the origin of species. And then two books that I spent my lifetime writing. One is Uses Organs. That was a strong argument that Darwin had for evolution. Why do we have all kinds of organs that are not very well developed? And of course, a good example they use is choking. Food goes down the wrong tube, and you can choke on the food. And the evolutionists say what you need is a second system to swallow food. And that actually, the example I'm giving is more appropriate with a poor design. These two are related. The poor design focuses on the design problems. Uses organisms focuses on the claims that certain organisms are not very useful. So there's overlap, but on the other hand, I try to separate the two into uses or vestigial organs, which was a strong argument for evolution for 100 and some years, and the poor design claims. In fact, the best example of poor design is the back. And I have a whole chapter which talks about it's not actually poor design. The evolutionists say we used to walk on all fours. Our back was evolved to walk on all fours. Since we don't walk on all fours, we're bipedal, and therefore the back has problems because the way we walk is not the way we're evolved to walk. Well, I show indeed how that idea is fully foolish. And I had back problems for a long time, and then I learned about the proper way of dealing with back problems is not laying in bed, as they used to say. So my doctor told me, oh, you need more rest. You need to spend more time in bed. And now we know that that's the opposite. If you have back problems, the best solution to back problems is, ironically, guess what? Walking, bipedalism. And so our back was designed to walk on two legs, and walking on two legs will facilitate its proper development and health. Now, other things, of course, can be part of the problem as well. Now, why isn't this more widely accepted? Why don't people, because we clearly have the evidence on our side. The evidence is overwhelming against Darwinian evolution. Why in the world doesn't everybody accept our worldview? Well, one reason is, as Ben Stein in his movie showed, one reason is very simply that people only see or are exposed to one side. Because the schools, at least in America, you can only see or experience or learn about one side in the schools. And therefore, because the other side, the design side, the creation side is expelled, most of us don't hear that. And the only way we can hear it is through the churches or through our parents or through friends. And so most people, if they hear the other side, they're going to hear it in the churches. The problem is, though, so many churches don't present the other side because so many pastors believe, doesn't matter what you believe, God created us, we evolved, it doesn't matter because God did it either way. And therefore, they are ambiguous or flip-flop on this question. Okay, fortunately, I've had a number of debates and exposure. This is an article which was there's me in the front page, the Toledo Blade, the largest paper in the Toledo area. And I talked about in this article, I talked about how important the film Expelled was and how indeed we need to be able to look at both sides. After all, as I mentioned, the evolution side is a worldview, i.e. a religion. And so we're taught in American schools, at least, we're taught a religion. It's just not the religion of theism. And that's the problem. Okay, Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The Selfish Gene. And he said, the conclusion that no ultimate purpose exists in the universe is a logical result of Darwinism held by many, if not most, orthodox evolutionists today. This is what he said in his book. It's a quote. And so Darwin acknowledges that his worldview, his religion, is a religion of purposelessness. And he actually does a good job of showing this. Creationists, by the way, love to quote Richard Dawkins because he has he's in so many ways, he's so honest. He has so many things to say which we agree with. And this is one example. Indeed, evolution is a religion of purposelessness. I can say that word, right? Okay, Darwinists once widely taught women were at a lower level of development than men due to an earlier arrest of individual evolution in human females. And because they had smaller brains, women were also believed to be eternally primitive and childlike, less spiritual, more materialistic, and a real danger to contemporary civilization. And these were Darwin's words in his book, The Origin of Species. And I think they're in a second book. Well, probably both books. So Darwin really believed that because, and he actually spent quite a bit of time talking about why women were evolutionarily inferior. One way is that the weak women are protected. Men go to war, the weak men die, they thought, and women don't go to war. Therefore, the weak, the less evolved are preserved, are more apt to pass on their genes. And that's another reason why women were less evolved than men. And today we find that pretty abhorrent. But on the other hand, Darwin is very clear in what he had to say. And some people question that. And so I have actually a copy of page 504 of The Descent of Man, where he said the chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man's attaining to a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than can women. And he spends quite a bit of time talking about how the average man is superior to the average woman. And he concludes the average mental powers in man must be above that of women. And this is only one of several places where he talks about the inferiority of women. Not a very politically correct thing to say nowadays, but, and there, by the way, are whole books written about this and Darwin's influence in society, which did not upheld or uphold women, but denigrated and put down and mistreated women. And the views that Darwin expressed here were not those of a small minority of intellectuals, but were a majority view in the late Victorian period. And Darwin's writings, from this book on misogyny, Darwin's writings played a major role in the development of this attitude. So David Gilmour, in his book, brings out quite accurately the fact that Darwinism had a lot to do with the attitude we developed of women, which regarded them as inferior. Darwin also was a racist. He believed the lower races would go extinct, and he opposed to helping the sick for that, although he realized that in the long run, you're not going to be able to do that. But this is a good example. This is from a book on evolution, and you can see a female Hottentot, and right next is a female gorilla. Needless to say, these drawings have enormous author freedom or artistic license. And I've never met a female Hottentot, and when I went to Africa, I met many. Never met one that looked like that, and I never met a gorilla, at least seen in zoos, that looked like that. So they are enormously distorted. And these pictures were very influential in our attitudes toward racism. And I have several books, by the way, which I documented the racist ideas of Charles Darwin. Darwin himself concluded it was hard to believe how wide was the difference between savage and civilized man. He concluded these savages were the most abject and miserable creatures he had ever seen. And so this is his opinion of the Tierra del Fuego natives. And there you can see civilized races, he said, are now everywhere extending their range so as to take the place of the lower races, which Darwin believed would eventually lose in the survival of the fittest struggle. So Darwin thought basically that the gap between us, the higher races, and monkeys will be greater because those in between, namely the lower races, the blacks primarily, and Australian Aborigines, would become extinct. And therefore the gap between higher evolved man and gorillas would be larger. And here's a book which I spend quite a bit of time covering, Darwin, Eugenics, and the Holocaust, and showing indeed how these ideas have influenced perception in America. Alfred Kinsey, he's an interesting guy because he was very promiscuous with students. His behavior, which he regularly engaged in, would not be acceptable today. He filmed basically him having sex with students. He filmed this, and the films are all there in University of Illinois, not Illinois, but University of Indiana, I think. But anyways, in his university where he taught at, those films are all there, but they can only be viewed with special permission. But his ideas clearly came from his exposure to Darwinism, and he made that very clear, why he believed what he did. And he was the one who pushed these ideas of sexual liberation. And now we know, those who have looked at his data, that his data were grossly fraudulent, that indeed he claimed to have proved things by surveys which he in no way, shape, or form have proved. And now we know that basically his surveys were on many, many standards, not only fallacious, but poorly done. For example, he learned about sexual behavior from men in prison who were in prison for sexual offenses. So you're not going to get a very accurate assessment of the average male by interviewing men who are in prison for sexual behavior. He himself was very promiscuous, as well as his wife, by the way. And he felt the only sex that you should condemn was that which would cause immediate harm to the offender. And he felt that promiscuous behavior was normal based on the animals. And here the Kinsey report was published. And there's one book on the human male, and then they did a second study on the human female. And these were published, interesting, by Saunders, one of the leading medical textbooks in the nation. And therefore, they became respectable because they were the books were published by a respectable publisher. Reading Negroes and Apes, they actually tried to do such, because if Negroes and apes were fairly close, we should be able to breed a mutt between the two, a Himanzi they called it, between the two. And needless to say, they actually failed, because we realize now that's not going to work. But this was done by Ivanovich, who was, by the way, a leading researcher in breeding and done a lot of very important work in breeding animals, primarily horses. And he thought, well, you could breed Negroes and apes. And they tried it, and for several reasons, they failed. Now, today, of course, we realize why, but back then they didn't. The future, there you go. There's a Himanzi, and there's Stalin. So you could use Himanzis to fight his wars and wouldn't have to worry about people dying in his wars. Margaret Sanger picked these ideas up as well, and she basically stressed that we need to breed a superior race. We need to do that by preventing, by birth control and abortion, those who are of an inferior race, primarily a Negro population, in her words. What we need to do is prohibit or try to reduce the children that they have. And one way of doing that is by instituting birth control. And she said here, this is her own words: the most merciful thing that a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. She wasn't favorable for large families. Abortion, about 1.5 billion induced abortion. It's a cause of death number one among blacks, number one cause, because most abortion clinics are built in the inner city or areas where blacks would have access to them. And so blacks, number one, abortion. Number two is cancer, and number three is heart disease, killers of blacks. And there's Jim Neal. He testified in the U.S. Supreme Court case, Roe v. Wade, and he basically said, it's not really a human being you're killing, but it's a fish, or at least partly a fish. And his arguments held some sway, and we can't weigh the exact amount, but somewhat in the Supreme Court's decision, because the baby is not a full human. It's has many fish traits, and therefore it's not wrong. Haeckel's fraudulent drawings, and we can see that this is a problem in evolution. So much of the information was fake, and this is an example of Haeckel's. You can see his drawing here of a salamander. Below it is actually what they look like. And so Haeckel was a really good artist, one of the best. You can buy whole beautiful books of his paintings, of his drawings. So he was a good artist. So we know that he deliberately faked this in order to convince people of the validity of his embryo stages. What he said was, in the early stages, all embryos look pretty much the same. And therefore they evolved from the same route, the same original organism. And so naturally, of course, we know that's not true. So that was proof of evolution, by the way, his embryos. And you can see an excellent book here about 500 pages, Haeckel's Embryos, Images, Evolution, and Fraud, carefully documenting why he faked, how he faked, and how important his fakes were in causing society, Germany first, and then later on the world, to accept evolution. As a young man, Darwin was sadistic. He loved to kill animals with anything he had. He would beat animals to death with hammers. And he, as a young boy, Darwin beat a puppy, enjoying the sense of power. And when you show this to audiences, they find this appalling. He had experiments he did on expressions, and those expressions were supposed to be natural. And you can see the picture in his book. Looks like this man is expressing horror, whatever. And actually, this expression was a result of putting electrodes to his forehead. And these electrodes cause pain, which caused that expression. And so he touched all this out, and he tried to imply that indeed this was a man who was, I guess, expressing horror. Well, yeah, he was, because he had 120 volts or whatever it was, stimulated his forehead and caused him to produce these changes. And here's another example. Now, here's one example Darwin had, which you can see the electrodes and many others. And in many ways, he was an angry man. He looks like he's 90 there. He looks like he's angry and doesn't look very healthy. And in many ways, he was an angry man. And I mentioned this when I give this presentation. I wish I was as young now as Darwin was then. I'm several years older than Darwin. I wish I was as young as he was, but I hope I didn't look nearly as bad as that. Any rate, and that's the end of my slides. It's a brief summary of my 30 books that I've written. So it'll give you an idea.
Wow, that was very enlightening, I think is the word, Dr. Bergman. We've had a lively live chat, and I think it's largely because of the provocative topic tonight. But this is the truth, and the truth is important, Dr. Bergman. And so I appreciate all your research, all your work, time, energy, and effort studying this topic. And so you kind of just answered the question. Again, lots of excellent feedback in the chat. We got a good mix of critics and non-critics. So some of the critics have a few things to say about the truth of Darwin, as you're laying out here, Jerry. And so Sandy C asks, which book of Dr. Bergman's does all this info come from, Donny? And I think you just said that it's largely a compilation of many of your books, right?
Yeah, but The Dark Side of Charles Darwin has the largest amount, which is available in U.S. and Canada. And so, a little story. I bought some books from London. Cost $3.95 proceeds sent it from London to Ohio. And I didn't find the books very useful, and so I investigated sending the books back. It cost $150 from Ohio to send it back to London. And I thought, what the difference? And he says, well, the guy at the post office said, that's what they said, and I can't change that. And I found the same thing in sending books to Canada. It would cost me a fortune. But fortunately, you can buy them right from Canada for less than I can buy them for on Amazon in Canada. And that's true of other countries.
Well, I've got a large collection of your books around me, Jerry, and I can get them on Amazon for pretty cheap, Prime, and they're here at my house in a day or so. So I think I'll be getting that book for sure. And I have a feeling many in the audience and many of our viewers will be as well, because this is important information, Jerry. And so you also mentioned closer to the beginning of your talk that you've got, was it 8 articles that are waiting to be published that have been approved?
Yeah, just this last week. So I was pretty happy. You send an article into a publisher, and sometimes you wait a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. You wonder, did they reject it? What's the problem? And it just so happened I ended up with 8 articles that came back accepted, and I just have to make editorial changes and so on, and fix things, and then send it back. So that's pretty usual. You get some good reviewers, and not many writers, every word he says is valid and accurate. So they wanted me to redo some sentences and make it clear. And so, but anyway, that's good. So they'll be published shortly.
Well, I'm looking forward to that, Jerry. I like to keep up on not only your books, but your articles. I like how, I like the variety of articles you put out. You're very thorough. You're well-rounded in terms of the topics. And so a few of the articles you've put out recently, I'd like to discuss a little bit during the Q&A or discussion here. And so in terms of today, as far as in terms of my interactions with evolutionists, evolutionary biologists, they would look to modern day Darwinism. They might call it neo-Darwinism, where they've incorporated genetics and epigenetics and other fields and thoughts there. And so many of the lines of evidence they use, you're familiar with. I'd like to get into some of those. But you wrote on one recently, and I've got it in front of me. Looks like it was May 22nd, a couple months ago. And so your article titled, "Why Don't Humans Make Their Own Vitamin C?" And so a major line of evidence the evolutionary community, the proponents of neo-Darwinism look to today, Jerry, is this argument essentially from junk DNA or pseudogenes. They'll say humans can't produce their own vitamin C, and neither can the great apes, because we've experienced a genetic mutation of the glucose gene at some point in the past. And so we've inherited that mistake from a common ancestor with the chimpanzee. They compare those mistakes with the great apes. Jerry, what would be a good response or counter to that argument?
Well, we find, and we know a lot about mutations. That's the work I did at the medical school, because mutations are a major cause of disease. And we find there's a lot of similarity in mutations. That among cancer, for example, invariably you have a certain mutation, which is very, very common. Well, you find that similarity in mutations is also true in different organisms, because many the higher primates, so to speak, have genes similar to ours, and so they're going to be prone to similar mutations. In fact, it surprises people to learn that we are prone to cancer. Many of the higher apes are prone to cancer, and they're prone to cancer for the same reason, the same mistakes, because the genes are similar. It's like when you break an arm, for example, or a leg, the break tends to occur in certain parts of the body. The weaker part, the arm is not equally strong from one point to the other. The humerus bone, for example, and the other bones have weak points, and therefore the breaks are more common in those areas. Well, you find the same thing is true with genes, that genes have weak points for many reasons, and therefore they tend to break. And this, what we have with, of course, the vitamin C gene is probably there's a weak point that makes it more common in certain animals. But this, of course, is not evolution. This is degeneration. And although it doesn't hurt us, because most of us get a good diet in fruit. Although it did in sailors when they went on trips in the boats and didn't have some citrus fruits with them, some limeys or lemons or other fruits that have vitamin C. So it did hurt some people, but most people throughout the Western world had plenty of fruits that they ingested, so therefore they weren't even aware of this problem because it didn't occur among them. So there's a lot of reasons for that similarity, but I don't remember if I talked about the exceptions, but there are some primates that don't have the problem, some that do have the problem, which you would not expect.
I think those are some excellent points. For the audience sake especially, I'd like to screen share your article here, Jerry. Okay. Why don't humans make their own vitamin C? I think it's an important topic. I think I'll make a clip of this section too, because many militant or adamant proponents of common descent continue to look to this one. And so you pointed out a number of things there, but if we share similar genes with other creatures, let's say the primates or even chimpanzees specifically, those similar genes are going to be more prone, simply due to environmental factors and other reasons as well, to the same breakages. And now, would that be due to mutational hotspots? I know that you talk about hotspots in this article as well. Is that essentially
what it is? Yeah, it would. That's be one reason. Also, I found the data is somewhat incomplete, and there are a lot of animals they didn't look at. And so I couldn't come to any conclusion that as firm as I would like, because we need to do analysis of all primates and many
Right.
organisms that are similar to us, like some of the more similar organisms to us are pigs. That's why we use the vowels from pigs, or used to at least. Guinea pigs, ironically, are immunologically similar to us. Rats are in many ways immunologically similar to us. And so we need to do a more detailed examination across the animal kind to make more definitive conclusions. But in evolution, there's no motive to do this. So I was surprised actually to come up with the articles I did.
Yeah, because here, in terms of anomalies, which the evolutionary community typically likes to ignore or not talk about as much, you say, but the bat and guinea pig violate the expected pattern, the pattern here when it comes to primates. Is that right?
Right. And there are probably others, but those are ones that I have the data on.
Now, and I like your point about the breaking a bone, whether it's your arm bone or your leg bone, which I have experience with. The people, when they break a certain bone, let's say in their arm, they're breaking it in very specific spots. A lot of the same spots are more prone to that kind of injury, in the same way that a lot of these genes are prone to similar breakages. And so I'm wondering, do you think, Dr. Bergman, that humans, since we get a lot of vitamin C from our diet, and we were created in a garden, which I'm assuming had a lot of fruits, vegetables, and vitamin C, do you think our gene there, the gulo gene, the original function was vitamin C production, or do you think it might have had a different function?
Well, I think it probably was vitamin C production. And
Okay.
there are some areas where evolution is, in a sense, true. And that would be if we have a mutation which causes a problem, that mutation may be more apt to be selected out. If we have mutations, which we do, that don't cause a problem, or at least don't cause a problem in reproduction, it's going to become more common. It's a result of Genesis fall, of course. We have certain mutations which are much more common than others. Male pattern baldness, I guess, is a good example. Color blindness is a good example, where these mutations don't generally affect our life expectancy or ability to reproduce. And so therefore, they, a lot of male pattern baldness is common, and a lot of males are, as I am, colorblind. And so that is.
Yeah, I think that's a good response. And so, since, as you pointed out, we get vitamin C from, so even though we can't synthesize our own vitamin C, we get a lot of vitamin C from our diet just naturally. We also take vitamin C supplements, and that would be similar to, let's say, a lot of your primates. They're getting vitamin C from their diet. So is that one of the reasons that makes this gene more prone to breaking, is because natural selection isn't really going to preserve the gene, since we're getting vitamin C from so many outside sources? We don't really need, it's not essential to have a gene to produce that which we're getting externally.
Right. It's just not as critical. If other genes broke that affected our life expectancy, then of course those would be selected out. And so natural selection has one function, and that is it reduces degeneration.
Right.
It doesn't cause us to go upward. It just reduces going downward. And so that this is a good example of where natural selection, in this case, doesn't have a negative effect, because it doesn't, in this case, causes it to go downward.
Right. Selection is just a fine-tuning mechanism, keeps a species as strong as it can be. Right. And so these genes that are not critical to life, they're going to be more prone to damage. And selection, it's not adding anything new. It's not taking species uphill, like you've said. And so it doesn't necessarily need to preserve a gene like a vitamin C producing gene. So I'm wondering, we know a lot of so-called pseudogenes. Dr. Bergman, I know you've written on this, you've talked about this. A lot of pseudogenes we've discovered aren't really broken genes. They're necessary to sustain healthy life processes. And in many so-called pseudogenes, the expression of that gene helps to regulate the translation of its protein coding counterpart. And so they're working together, which I find is very interesting. And so how can we determine what is a real broken gene, like what seems to be the case with the gulo pseudogene, and a gene that the evolutionary community simply says is broken, but really isn't broken? It has a design function.
Takes a lot of gene sequencing, which is what I used to do, And now it's a lot easier. I did a lot of this by hand, which is, I think of it as kind of primitive how I did it, but it was good that I did it that way because I understood what we were doing. And now we don't do much of it by hand. It's done by machines. And therefore, I can see that people have a hard time understanding what the machine is doing. Or I understand what it's doing because I did that by hand. So therefore, each step that we took, I knew why we did it and what we were trying to do. And so there's an advantage of learning it the way I did. But now, of course, it's, you can sequence genomes just like crazy. And of course, they are doing huge amount of sequencing when you can sequence the entire, well, it took what, 3 years to sequence the human genome. Now you can do it in 3 hours. And so
that's amazing.
As we have more and more sequencing, we're able to do more and more of these comparisons and determine more and more specifically what genes cause the problem and what genes are mutated, just be passed on and not cause a problem. Therefore, they're not selected against. Therefore, they can be common in our population.
That's a great answer. I think we're just in the infancy of understanding fully the DNA language. And the more our sequencing capabilities become more sophisticated, the more we learn really about the DNA, the more functional we find it to be. Would it be accurate, Jerry, to say that there's two different starting points with the creationists like ourselves and the evolutionists when it comes to DNA variation? As a creationist, would we say that the majority of DNA variation is due to design diversity? It's the evolutionist that explains all DNA differences and DNA variation as being the result of mutations. So they're looking at all DNA variation as mutations, whereas a creationist, we're working to determine what is a mutation and what's a design difference.
Yeah, that's a good illustration that we're looking at perfection lost. They're looking at perfection gained.
Yeah.
So they're looking at the opposite of what we are. They're looking at natural selection will perfect the genome. We're looking at a perfect genome, which has lost that perfection due to the fall.
That's great. Yeah. It's a genome that's essentially going downhill. So here's a critic in the chat. We like to leave no stone unturned. And we appreciate our critics here, our proponents of evolution. And so Andrew Cumming, this is his argument or response. He says mutational hotspots. He's basically arguing mutational hotspots is insufficient because they don't explain similar pseudogenes with similar mutations. So I think he's pointing to so-called mutations within the pseudogene. So maybe mutations within the gulo gene. Hotspots lead to higher frequency of mutations, not specific mutations. In your opinion, what would be a good
hotspots leads to a mutation in a specific area of the genome. And that's what we did when they were doing research on cancer. You find that certain, for example, P53, which is the one I worked with, very important system. And there were like 4 places that 90% of all the mutations occurred. And therefore, when you have a cancer patient, a high percent of the time, you have a mutation in one of these 4 places. And so we're talking about specific places in the genome, in this case, P53. And most cancers, you have hotspots, and that's what you're looking for. And then you have cold spots, which of course rarely occur. And so I guess I don't quite follow what, of course, my work is cancer and trying to understand the cause of cancer and so on. But pseudogenes, I don't know much about how that relates to pseudogenes. But I would guess pseudogenes would have hotspots and therefore would cause the gene not to work. And therefore we call it a pseudogene, which is a term I don't like. Pseudogenes,
right?
False gene. They're not looking at false genes. They're looking at genes that are not functional, non-functional. And they could be non-functional because of hotspots. So, and in cancer research, that's a key of understanding where the change occurs and why.
Right.
Now,
and
go ahead.
Well, I was going to point out in your article here, which I've got on the screen again, you show the mutation pattern or spectrum. And when you consider everything, you point out, note the loss of the ability to synthesize vitamin C appears to be random and not due to inheritance from an evolutionary ancestor. I've read papers, one that specifically comes to mind, where they show the independent breaking or acquisition of these mutations in many different creatures that is not related to ancestry. So just because we may have the same DNA break as another creature does not necessitate that we inherited that from a common ancestor with that creature. Is that right, Jerry?
Yeah, that's right. And again, I wish we had more data, but we had enough data where I think my conclusions will hold even when we do more sequencing. But it's not a leading area in genetics to research the damaged gene that produces vitamin C. So a lot more important, of course, are cancer genes that cause cancer. And there's so many diseases that are mutational caused. Therefore, that has to be the focus, and is the focus. But in doing that, we can pick up a lot of other information, like, for example, this claims relative to inheritance.
That's a great answer. I appreciate that, Jerry. I think that puts that argument to bed. We also need further research and data, or else, especially with the evolutionists, they'd be premature to make the conclusions that they make. And so we'll turn that into a clip so people have a go-to video on the Gulo pseudogene. So Jerry, I appreciate that and your work on that topic. Okay, so next question here. Here's another one I've seen recently. We host a lot of debates here on the channel as well. And it's kind of, it's an aspect in a way of the vestigial organ argument. And it has to do with so-called bad design. So proponents of common descent or the theory of evolution look to the recurrent laryngeal nerve as evidence for bad, is that in the giraffe, I think, perhaps? For bad design and therefore no design. And I know you've written an article on this, if I'm not mistaken, in at ICR. And so what's a good response to that?
I've written several articles. I have a chapter on that in my book. Basically, the design of the recurrent lingual nerve exists for at least 4 different reasons. And so it's not poor design. What the concern is that instead of going directly to its goal, it goes around and turnabout. It's like, I'm going to your house, and therefore I go to Toronto first, and then I walk back to your house in where your city. And so that's not a very wise route to take, because I'm spending a lot of time going somewhere else. I'm backtracking to get to your house. But the recurrent lingual nerve, they claim, does that same thing. But the fact is, there are good reasons for at least 6 I mentioned for the recurrent lingual nerve to be designed the way it is. Number one, it works pretty well. And so it works very well. And so I haven't, in the medical field, haven't heard any concerns about this so-called poor design causing problems. And so it does work pretty well. And there's a drawing which I use in my book, which I can use to show that better, but you probably don't have a copy here. But next time maybe I do a show, we can point out that specifically. But one point I point out is the timing. And when signals are sent, it takes so long to get to where they're going. And signals get there too early or too late is a problem. And so the recurrent lingual nerve, among other functions, it causes the signal to get there at the right time, not too early or not too late. And I'm not sure that's talked about much in the medical books, but that's one issue that came up, which I thought was a good argument, that there are good reasons time-wise. And that's true with all nerves, of course. It has to have a journey, and that journey has to arrive at the location in a specific time. And too early, too late, it's a problem. It causes uncoordination if it's too early or too late. So coordination is critical, and that means the signal has to get there when it needs to be there to coordinate the host system of talking.
Very good, Jerry. So in other words, it's not an example of bad or poor design as the evolutionary community purports?
Not at all. It's an example of not good, but ingenious design the way it's designed.
That's awesome. How does, I kind of find the argument from bad design to be humorous. We understand there is no bad design, but let's just entertain the idea, bad design. Does that equate no design or no designer? I mean, especially in the human design world, there's many bad designs we could point to, but doesn't mean that those things weren't designed.
Right. They try to show it's bad design and therefore it's no design. And of course, that argument is fallacious. It may be even true. It may be a bad design, but that doesn't mean it's not designed. And again, what I'm looking at is what appears to be bad design. When we look further into it, turns out to be very good design. I mean, you can say that, well, humans can only do 1 or 2 things at a time. wouldn't it be nice if humans had the abilities that some animals do, and we can do 2 or 3 things? We can have smell like a dog. We can have vision like a eagle. We could have brain response like, I don't know, a computer. So why can't we have all of these things? Well, there's a good reason why we can't have all of these things, and that would be information overload. And that is a problem with, well, every mother with screaming kids and a husband he's trying to take care of and so on. Well, we all recognize over-design, overstimulation. Autistic persons, for example, are easily overstimulated by things to us that don't bother us. The furnace goes on, the refrigerator goes on. That is stimulus that bothers them because they are overstimulated. We can deal with that, but autism is a neurological disorder where this coordination is not as it should be. And so to have more sensitive smell or more sensitive eyes that can see better could be a problem, because not only of over-design, but also because it may interfere with effective picking up information. We tend to hear in frequencies that people talk in. And so the frequencies from 20 to 100,000 hertz. So there's a huge range there, and our ears are designed to hear primarily the range that people talk in. And so we pick up voices of people very effectively, and we don't pick up other noises which are there. I learned this, by the way, by tape recording when I went to medical school. I had a tape record all my lectures, and I played them in the car on the way home because I had an hour drive, and I thought that's a good review. And when I played them in the car, I could not follow them very well because all the noises, the other noises, that when the heating, the cooling went on, you could hear that and overpowered or at least interfered with the person speaking. And so then I realized what was happening was my hearing system is designed to pick up effectively voices and filter out the flow of air caused by the air conditioning system. But the tape recorder I had wasn't designed to do that, and therefore it picked up all those noises. And therefore, when I played the tapes in my car, it was much harder than it should be to listen to my professor.
Very good, Jerry. I think there's another clip-worthy moment on that topic of bad design. Here's a question that comes in, and it is from Andrew Cumming here. And so the question is, what's the purpose of some animals growing certain organs early on in embryonic development? Might be good, Andrew, if you wanted to provide us a specific example, only to lose them later on as infants. Jerry, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in the embryo, you realize, has to develop the organs necessary to survive at that stage of development.
Right.
And therefore, the nervous system matures first, because the nervous system has to be able to coordinate the body system. And therefore, it matures first. And therefore, human tails are very prominent. Of course, it's not a tail, it's the nervous system. The spinal cord develops first, because that coordination must take place early in the life of the infant. Later on, its other organs take over, and the nervous system, of course, doesn't, in this case, degenerate, but it develops a certain point much earlier than it would seem to need to. And then later on, of course, it does, other organ systems catch up. But another example, I think, is blood. Blood is not produced in the infant until late. And that's because the infant's primary supply of nutrients and oxygen and elimination of waste comes through the placenta. And so the organism has a system of producing the needs, the oxygen and needs, as well as elimination of the waste needs. And therefore has that because of the placenta. And therefore the system that produces blood cells does not develop until much later, because it's not needed until much later. The same thing with the lungs, of course. The baby doesn't use its lungs when it's in the infant, when it's in the embryo. And therefore, when it is born, the lungs have for the first time to be used, but they have to develop only necessary to work when the baby is born. And so therefore, the development lags in the development of the lungs when the baby is developing.
Well, that's an excellent response, and I had not thought of some of those points, Jerry. That's really good. I think that's why these discussions are important, especially addressing some of the critics here. And so these structures that, because I know there's many examples of structures or organs being present in embryonic development, and then over time they get reabsorbed. So during those times that they're present, they're essential. They're critical for those stages of development. And then once they're no longer needed or useful, then they're either reabsorbed or repurposed into a different structure. So I'm wondering, because I've seen evolutionists, Jerry, point to, I think it's dolphins, and they'll say, oh, dolphins, they, in early stages of development, they have these limb buds, arm and leg limb buds, and then eventually those are reabsorbed. And so they extrapolate that to mean, well, that must mean that dolphins are descendants of walking mammals, as you know, with whale evolution. So I guess my question would be, why do you think those limb buds, if that really is the case, this is their assertion, in dolphin embryos, how come those limb buds are present for a time and then they're reabsorbed?
I understand those limb buds are developed to coordinate the rest of the system in order for it to develop. It's kind of like a scaffolding, which is placed in the building to put the bricks up. But once the bricks are up, you don't need it, and therefore you can take the scaffolding down. So the limb buds, and there are other structures as well, which are necessary as part of the construction, but not necessary once the construction is finished. And so limb buds would be a attachment point to allow other systems to develop until, of course, they're developed, and then they're no longer needed. So then, therefore, they're reabsorbed. There are actually quite a few structures that are temporary, that are developed in animals. But the problem I see is people look at these and they make extrapolations or interpretations based on evolution. And they often turn out to be wrong, because we realize now there are reasons for this development and it has nothing to do with evolution. So when we see what appears to be a organ that develops and then dissipates later on, well, that's because of evolution. And that kind of answers it, but it doesn't. What we should say is, well, it could be because of evolution, but may not be. So let's do more research and find out what these limb buds are for. Then, as we do research, we may find out that they're for a very specific reason during the development of the organism. And therefore, we can avoid these wrong roads that saying, well, it's because of evolution. In many ways, evolution is a knowledge stopper. Well, why is this the way it is? Well, it's because of evolution. End of story. And we ought to say, why is it the way it is? Well, I don't know. Let's try to find out. So we close doors, I think, with the evolution explanation.
Yes, we close doors. Yes, I think that restricts scientific advancement, and that would be the mature and responsible approach and thing to do. And so I like the way you put it there. I think that's great. I think this is an excellent response that people need to consider as they are confronted with these evolutionary arguments, whether it's online or in person, that these structures like the limb buds, they're a necessary part of the construction during the process, but not necessarily, but not required for the final product. And so that's why they can be reabsorbed. What about for the animal in embryonic development to move around and shift? Maybe those so-called limb buds could be used for those stages for a purpose like that, just to move around and shift, and then eventually they're repurposed until more structures come about. I think the main point, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, is what we observe here does not necessitate evolution. These evolutionary extrapolations are not necessary. They can have other reasons or purposes.
That's true.
Okay. Another article that you wrote recently, which I thought was excellent and really just a fascinating line of evidence for creation, in my opinion. And so right here, Dr. Bergman, July 10th, ape and human Y chromosomes compared. So in my study, without going through the details of the article, and maybe you can speak to this, the human and ape Y chromosomes are divergent in many ways. The human and chimpanzee Y, and just from my own slides here, I have a visual of your Y chromosomes from the primates because the evolutionary community considers humans to be human apes, and then your chimpanzees, bonobos, so on and so forth to be non-human apes. When you actually compare the Y chromosome with, let's say, the chimpanzee Y, they're nothing alike. They're only about 35% the same when you consider overall size differences, overall architecture, and gene content. It's half the size, as you can see here. And in terms of the nested hierarchy they like to point to, right, Jerry? The gorilla Y and the human Y are more similar to each other than either are to the chimpanzee Y. And so there's a break in their so-called hierarchy. Anyways, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to your work here and this topic of ape and human Y chromosomes being compared.
Well, one thing that bothers me, which I pointed out in the article, was that what they're trying to do is they'll do a sequence, another sequence, and they compare the two. And they look at this sequence evolved into this sequence. Now, the problem with that is, of course, we don't have any sequences of our missing link between us and the apes. So they take modern apes and modern humans, and they assume that the ape genome was similar 50,000, 100, 200,000 years ago. And the human, therefore, evolved from this ape genome. And the problem with that is, of course, is they're comparing modern to modern and not actual ancient to modern. And that's one problem. The other problem is what we need to focus on, I think, is why are there differences? Not how one became another, but why the original in the ape, for example, is different, what function it has, and why the Y in us, for example, is different and the function it has. And of course, one major obvious difference is that is the sexual dimorphism between humans is much greater than that between apes. Male and female ape are similar. You can tell the difference if you studied anatomy, but by and large, the human differences, when you go through adolescence, pretty obvious that this person's a male and this person's a female. I know sometimes it's not as obvious, but generally it's quite obvious the differences between males and females, quite outstanding. In fact, when you look at this transsexual revolution in this country, the surgery to make a man into a woman involved shaving the Adam's apple, because that's a sexual difference, a secondary sexual trait, because men have a more prominent Adam's apple than women do. So if you want to transition to a woman, there's about 35 operations that can be done to cause that transition to occur. And one of them is shaving the Adam's apple down. So that's a secondary sexual trait. And so when you look at chromosomal differences between males and females, especially the X and the Y, or the X in particular, then we can see that a lot of those differences have to do with the male secondary sexual trait differences, which causes the animals to be dimorphic. Dimorphism, of course, for most animals, there's differences, but not nearly as great in most cases as people. We have a huge dimorphism between male and females in humans, but in cats is the most famous example, when the vet makes a mistake. Oh, sorry, I thought this was a female, but it's a male. And I always find that humorous. You're a vet, you're supposed to be able to tell the difference. But I'm understanding from friends that had their cat checked by the vet, vets not uncommonly make mistakes. And I say, come on, you should figure that out. And he said, well, when they're really young, it's not that easy to figure out. When they get older, it sometimes is a lot easier. But on the other hand, with some animals, of course, dogs is more apparent. But on the other hand, most physical traits of a dog are pretty identical to males and females. But certainly with humans, that's not the case.
I think you made a lot of excellent points there. And so what we're looking at would be better explained as functional or design differences rather than evolutionary differences from a common ancestor.
Evolution leads them away, I think, from what the main purpose should be of understanding the genome. Let's try to figure out what it does and why there are differences, not trying to hypothesize how the differences occurred through evolution.
Right, I think you nailed it, because this visual here, Jerry, this comes from an evolutionary publication in 2017. And notice how they assume evolution to prove evolution. So they got human and chimpanzees here. So chimpanzees are our supposed closest cousin. And we go back to an apparent ancestor 6 million years ago here. And then there was a split. Human line one way, chimpanzee and bonobo lineages the other way. But they're assuming that this common ancestor 6 million years ago actually existed, but we don't have the genetics or the data or the evidence of this ancestor. Is that right, Dr. Bergman?
Oh, yeah, that's right. And that is an interesting area to look at, which I haven't done so recently. So I'm glad you brought that up. If that comes up in the literature, I'd like to do some comparisons between the human Y and the chimp and other Y. And I expect there would be a huge difference because, of course, humans are very sexually dimorphic, not nearly as much as many animals are, or
Well,
much more so than many animals.
Yeah, it's interesting because in this publication, they say that the Y chromosomes between the human and chimpanzee differ enormously. So it's not just a moderate difference, but it's an enormous difference in size and gene content. They say the chimpanzee Y is only half the size as the human Y. And in terms of shared genes and overall architecture, the human Y is more similar to the gorilla Y than to the chimpanzee Y. And so as a creationist, we can view this without that evolutionary lens or bias and say, yeah, they're so different because they're not related. We're looking at separate ancestries. But the evolutionists, correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, they're assuming evolution. So now they're just going to explain it. You talk about this in your paper. They're just going to have to say, well, after the human and chimpanzee lineages split, these deletions happened over here. This duplication happened over here. So aren't they assuming erroneously that these mutations even happened in the first place to make these differences?
Clearly, they assume evolution is true and try to explain the world, in this case, the genetics world based on evolution. And boy, that gets one into trouble. I've learned you got to be careful about assuming things because assumptions can get you into big trouble. And so in your life, I'm sure if you think about your past 20, 30 years, assumptions got you into trouble because you assumed something which turned out not to be true. And so in the case of evolution, they all too often assume things which all too often turns out to be not true. And so stop assuming, just look at the genes and try to find out why they are different. Don't assume, try to figure out why they're different. And with apes and humans, of course, we know major reason is that humans are among the most dimorphic of all animals, all sexual animals. Most animals, I would say the majority of animals, you can't tell the difference between males and females. You know, if you're an expert, you can. Size is big, colors, so there are differences. But on the other hand, without knowing a lot about birds, for example, I can't tell whether or not a bird coming up to my feeder is a male or female. I can't tell. Now, if I was an expert, I could, but there's not obvious differences where with people, it's pretty obvious. Even if you're a 3-year-old, you can tell the difference between a male and a female because the differences are so great. Right. 3-year-olds know very well, very early, who's mommy and who's daddy and the differences. So
what would be your favorite way or preferred way in terms of baraminology? Because we as creationists, we believe in separate ancestry. We would argue that humans are not related to any other form of life. We could group humans together with Neanderthals, Homo erectus, so on and so forth. We've done shows on that in the past, Jerry. But that group, the human group or humankind, are separate and independent from, let's say, the chimpanzees, gorillas, dogs, fish, banana plants, and so on and so forth. Where the evolutionists, they argue for universal common ancestry. All life is related through common ancestry. And so what's the best way, or what's a way that we as creationists can determine that boundary where we say this creature is unrelated to these creatures over here?
I think one of the best illustrations, if you look at the human phylogeny tree, we all were at one time, well, the most ancient common ancestor of all life is sponges.
Right.
And so later on, though, we got worms. And so in the human evolutionary tree, you got at the bottom, you got a worm, and that worm eventually evolved into people. Well, another worm is still a worm. It's not evolved at all. Another worm, that's interesting, I did an article on this. Another worm is, ironically, has evolved human type eyes, but that's about all. Looks very strange creature, but nonetheless, this worm evolved human camera type eye. This worm didn't evolve at all, and this worm evolved into people. So if you line it up that way, you can see I think, a big problem in evolution, in that why did this worm continue to stay a worm? Why now? Evolutionists can explain that. Well, it was highly evolved, and therefore it well adapted to its environment, and therefore it didn't need to change. And so therefore, no problem. But on the other hand, why did this worm evolve into people? Well, its environment was not well adapted, and so therefore it evolved to better adapt to its environment. But in many ways, the environments are the same. It's hard to say this environment caused this worm to evolve eventually into people. This environment caused this worm not to evolve at all. And another environment caused this worm to evolve camera-type eyes, which look very weird, but they work pretty well, I guess, from the research.
That's an excellent answer. I just finished a 3-part series with Dr. Carl Werner on his work on living fossils. And he pointed out that there are many species of mammals existing with the dinosaurs, but textbooks and kids' books don't like to show that. Many living fossils all throughout the rock strata that haven't changed at all in millions and millions of years. And so I think you nailed it there. Why didn't this specific organism evolve into anything else? But then this organism, in the same amount of time, evolved from a small primate-like creature into humans. I mean, those are some major changes, and we all live in very similar environments. And so why is one organism changing so drastically in terms of phenotype, and then another one is not changing at all, if evolution is true?
That's true. It's a good point.
That's some great points you're making, Jerry. So we'll start to wind things down, and I'm already looking forward to the next program with you, Jerry, because I feel like I could ask questions to you all day. The audience loves asking questions. You're a wealth of information, and so I appreciate this. This is important, and it's important to show people, Jerry, that it's a great time to be a biblical creationist. That's for sure. And so this question, you touched on this a little bit in your presentation. You went over, I think it was a book or a presentation you've done, useless organs. And so evolutionists look to vestigial organs as evidence for common descent. What is the best response or counter to this argument?
Well, we have spent a lot of time researching the functions of these vestigial organs, and we found about 100 were originally proposed around 1900. And now we found all of them have a very clear, definite use. Now, it's some organs don't have as much importance as others, but that's true with all the organs in the body. And so some vestigial organs, yes, are not as important as others, which is true of all organs in the body. You can live without one kidney. You can live without one lung. I only have 1.5 lungs. And so therefore, I don't have 2 full lungs. And I didn't even know that until they did an x-ray and said, hey, Bergman, you got a problem here. The one lung is about half the size of what it should be. And so I was in his 50s when I discovered that. So why didn't I know that before? Well, I guess it didn't affect you. It wasn't that. So it certainly wasn't vestigial. And I can notice that I get out of breath sooner than other people because I only have 1.5 lungs. I don't have 2 complete lungs. And so I notice it now. It does affect me, but it's, as long as you're fairly healthy, it doesn't cause a problem. And so the same thing is true with all the vestigial organs. They all have a function. The function is without it, it's lethal. It's surprising that organs were labeled as vestigial, which now we know are necessary for life in the long run, and therefore, and some in the short run. And therefore, you'll find some are not as critical as others, but they all have a function. And so therefore, the vestigial organ, which of course, Darwin called that rudimentary organs. They're rudiments of what they used to be. And that's a judgment which has a problem. So vestigial basically has no function. And as a result, we now know it was a mistake to assume they had no function, because what we should have done is look for the function. And we indeed in time have done that and found they have a function. And that helps us understand the body. But the claim that, it's vestigial, has no function, is again a research blocker. It turns off research, and we don't want to turn off research. We want to ask, what does it do instead? It doesn't do anything because it's vestigial, which is the information blocker. So that's one of the first areas I became interested in. and I wrote a book 1970 something, and on vestigial organs, and that's been around for a long time, and there's lots of copies.
And they're still using it. You've been destroying vestigial organs as a line of evidence for evolution for years, Jerry. They're still using it. And so have they revised history in a way, historical revisionism? What I mean by that is now they'll say, well, the definition of vestigial organ is not necessarily no function. It can be a repurposed function. Maybe it's or an added, the addition of a function. Is this what how they've always defined it?
That is one way they get around the problem. But the problem is, though, that a lot of these organs, they said, had no use. And of course, so now they have a use. Right. They don't have an important use, or they don't have a use as they had in the past. So they're claiming, well, this organ did this and this and this in the past, but today it doesn't do those things. And so therefore it is less useful. And again, it's pretty clear that some don't have an important function, but that's beside the point. But by and large, I think this is where they really have egg on their face. And many evolutionists realize by putting the label vestigial on them that made us make a mistake, because it didn't encourage us to look into the function of that organ. And that's what we need to focus on.
Are wisdom teeth vestigial?
No, it's a humorous one when people say, what do they do? Well, they chew food.
Yeah.
Like all the other teeth.
Simple.
No, they have a very important function. In fact, they used to assume they were a problem and they pull them out for no reason. Now they know that they need to be saved. And so now you have an impacted tooth. Well, it doesn't look too bad. Maybe they'll come in straight. Let's give you some painkillers. Let's deal with the pain. And this, hopefully they'll come in straight, because they are very useful teeth. In fact, if you have a problem with other teeth, the wisdom teeth will allow an anchoring point to help other teeth straighten out or heal properly. And so therefore now the dental theory is you save those teeth as much as possible. Now, if they're really impacted, they're serious, they're coming in at a 45-degree angle and they should be coming in at a 90-degree angle. Yeah, they may have to be taken out, but that's another problem. That usually is a problem with our diet. They sent dentists over to Solomon Islands and other places trying to help them with their teeth. And they found, ironically, almost nobody in these places had problematic wisdom teeth. And they realized the difference is the diet between our diet and their diet. Most of our food, it's baby food. Most of the food is pureed in such a way where you can almost drink it. And chewing is pretty minimal. But in these islands where they had no problem with wisdom teeth, they had to chew their food pretty aggressively in order to break down the food and swallow it. And therefore they found that chewing strengthened the jaw, lengthened the jaw, and made it less likely that they would have problems with the wisdom teeth. So probably the main problems today for most of us are simply, our diet. That's a problem. And of course, there's some genetic. Some people just have small jaws, and therefore, they're going to have a problem. And so that has nothing to do with a vestigial organ argument. That's true with other issues as well.
Could that be a form of devolution or degeneration, where in the past, maybe our pre-flood ancestor had bigger jaws, stronger jaws, and so now people with smaller jaws, they can't handle the wisdom teeth?
That's a good point. And that's, I think that's not only our de-evolution, our degeneration, but also our culture, our eating food that doesn't need much chewing. And therefore, that's several reasons.
So is this similar to tonsils? Because I know when I was growing up as a kid, it seemed like everybody was getting their tonsils removed, but not as many people are getting their tonsils removed now. It's like they realize they're more important than they thought. Is that true, Jerry?
The number has plummeted. I don't have the data in front of me, but it was like, 80% or 60% used to have tonsillectomies, and now it's like 2 out of 1,000 or 2 out of 500. So it's really plummeted enormously. It has so because we realize the tonsils are there. They're there for an important reason, and having their removal can cause and does cause problems, especially when you get older. So now they try to save it. Tonsillitis problems, antibiotics. Let's try that. Let's try. If that doesn't work, then we'll think about removal. But we're not going to look at removal until we first of all try a good load of strong antibiotics. And that usually takes care of it. And so therefore, tonsillectomies used to be the most common surgical operation in children. And now it's one of the rarest operations in children.
Isn't it amazing how evolutionary philosophy over the years, Jerry, has really harmed scientific advancement? It's hindered science. Now we're catching up with the creation mindset that there actually is function and use and purpose to these structures and organs.
Good point, and that's what I focus on. Most creationists do not focus on this, so I was told a long time ago, if you want to publish, you need to get a niche. You can't put an article out where 37 articles exist on the same topic. You've got to cover an area that's not covered or rarely covered. And so I decided 30 years ago, I'm going to focus on areas that the vast majority of creationists don't cover. And so when I have a proposal for a book, they always ask, what's your competition? What books are even close to what you're writing? And I can usually say 0, there is no competition. And that helps a lot in getting a book published, because they don't want your book to be the 38th book that covers the same topic.
Right.
They want to publish a book that is unique, or at least in many ways is unique. And I've had really good success in publishing my books because, well, they're all unique. When I point out that there's no competition, 0 competition, like my book on the dark side of Charles Darwin, there's no competition, nothing. And so therefore, it has a niche. And so you need to write in areas that have a niche. And I have a social science background, a historical background. One of my minors in college was history. And so therefore I can cover these areas where other professors are not as comfortable covering if they have only science background. Or I have a social science as well as historical background. And I used to teach in both those areas. And so therefore I have a good background in those areas, and therefore I can enjoy writing, and it's just a niche. And why should I have proposed my own theory of the flood?
Right.
Too many out there already, and I would have to start off from square one. I'm not a geologist, and I'm not a cinematologist, and I'm not a person with a background in that area to write about those topics. So I focus on what I know a lot about and what I've had interest. A lot of interest in World War II and Adolf Hitler, and written 3 books and several hundred articles dealing with Hitler. In fact, just one of my articles that was recently accepted deals with the problems that Darwinism has caused in society. And so that's an interest of mine, and I find a lot of people are interested. And that's why I think my Darwin book especially, and my Hitler book, have done really, really well of all the books I published. And so there's a niche and you fill it.
The New and Improved Global Flood Model by Jerry Bergman. There's a future book for you.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I've got, again, several of your books behind me. C.S. Lewis. There's a unique book that nobody's written on. No good rebuttals either to it. Your books on Darwinism, and your books on fossil forensics I have as well. So you've done some excellent work. And I think that's some really good wisdom, knowledge, and advice right there, Jerry. Because I like to say, especially if people ask, I want to get into creation apologetics. Where do I start? How do I proceed? And I like to say, find a need and fill it. Find a niche. Don't pick something that's already been done 30, 40, 50 times, like you said. Pick something that's not being focused on enough or being dealt with. That's why I chose to write a book on endogenous retroviruses. I realized nobody was really writing on it. There wasn't any books on it. So I found a need and I filled it, brother. And that's great advice that you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay. In order to leave no stone unturned, I'd like to ask, in light of the vestigial organs argument, what are your thoughts on atavism? So slightly different. If I understand it correctly, the evolutionary interpretation or argument is that sometimes we have evolutionary traits reappear after having been lost through evolutionary change. A couple examples they point to. So babies born with so-called tails attached. And then another one is chicken teeth. apparently some chickens are born with teeth, or maybe they're able to alter their genetics a little bit to get teeth manifested. I'm wondering what a good response to that would be, Jerry.
Yeah, I've written only a couple of articles on that area, so I have less, I guess, background in that area. But yeah, atavism is where the throwback to what a animal had eons ago. So chickens, I guess they feel evolved from animals with teeth, and therefore every now and then they show up with teeth, and so therefore that's an atavism. A lot of these are almost silly, the ones they argue, especially human atavism. And so they recognize, I think, they're silly, so they don't get very far. But on the other hand, what happens is some abnormalities can appear to be an atavism, which is not. And a good example is the hen's teeth. That is a bone deformity. From what I recall, they're not clearly 100% teeth. They're more of a distortion of the jaw itself in the birds. Now, I may be wrong on that, but that's from what I've read, that's the assumption that they've come up with. So the tail is probably the best and most famous example. And in the vast majority of cases, these aren't tails. They don't have any nerves in them. They don't have any coccyx in them. They're typically structures which are filled full of fat, which can be not only where the tail would normally be, but also in other parts of the body, like where the neck is. And so they form these fat-filled structures form. And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if anybody knows why, because not a concern, because just lop them off. When the baby's born and it's got a tail, the doctor just says, okay, we'll cut it off and sew it up and he'll be fine. And so it doesn't cause any major health problems. So it's probably hard to get money to do research on why the tails develop, but because they're not a problem. And I know I've looked at quite a bit of knowledge, quite a few studies on the so-called atavistic tails, and most of them are not such. The few that are could be an abnormality in the os coccyx, which causes it to grow farther than it normally should. And I guess there's a few rare cases which do have nerves and are connected to the spinal cord. And so they would be more likely to be atavistic tails. But on the other hand, they are rare, and there are other explanations. Most likely a deformity, which causes it. Which surgical removal, it's no problem.
Now, for sake of argument, I'm just wondering about the so-called chicken teeth. Someone in the chat said what they did was mutated a gene or a set of genes and manifested teeth. But from a creationist perspective and model, Jerry, would it be accurate to say that in the pre-flood world, maybe immediate post-flood world, because we do find some birds in the geologic rock strata, like Archaeopteryx being one of them, that do have teeth. And so if we're able to genetically manipulate chicken DNA to manifest teeth, wouldn't that just be evidence, again, of de-evolution or degeneration, where some birds once had teeth, then they lost them, but they still have the DNA for those teeth present?
Yeah, that could well be. I would like to look carefully at the teeth themselves.
Right.
And ensure that they indeed are teeth, have the structures of teeth, because teeth are complex structures. Although in birds, I don't know. Maybe the teeth are really not teeth as we understand teeth. Maybe they're just projections from the gum. Hardcore. I know some animals that is, quote, their teeth is just the gum has hard sections in it, which allows them to roughly chew food up, but they're not like teeth in humans. And so that could be what's going on, that they're just structures that are kind of like hard gums, which does fine for their diet, but for humans would not do fine for our diet. And many animals would not do fine. So that could be. Maybe that's an area I have to look into it sometime.
If only we have unlimited time, right? I think that's why sleep's so boring, because we just want to be up 24/7, brother, doing research, studying, writing articles. So, okay, Jerry, we covered a lot of ground tonight. I appreciate it as always. I'm already looking forward to our next show together, because I got more questions for you. And so we touched on the gulo pseudogene and pseudogenes in general, vestigial organs and structures, atavisms, Y chromosomes, the laryngeal nerve, and so-called bad design. So we covered a lot of ground, Jerry. I appreciate how comprehensive you are. You also gave a great presentation. So anybody who's just joining us live as we're coming up at the 2-hour mark, please, we're about to wrap up. The show will be available publicly for people to enjoy. Go back, watch from the beginning. You're definitely not going to want to miss what many people don't know about Charles Darwin. So, Jerry, I appreciate your time, and I want to hand it over to you in case you had any final words or final thoughts.
Just it's a fascinating area, and it takes someone interested in science or medicine, I think, to get into this, because so many people, like my wife, just has no interest at all. She's a creationist, end of story, and there's no point in studying all this. But then I have a strong interest in science, where her interest, which is fine, is in other areas. So she has a strong interest in prophecy, etc., which I don't have much interest in at all. So she does the work on prophecy, and she fills me in, and I do the work on the creationism and fill her in. So I guess we complement each other in that way.
A good team.
But so that works out well. But on the other hand, I've always been interested in science since I was a little kid. And I think that was probably generated by my dad. He was a scientist himself. And so when we spent time together, he talked about science and went to science movies, went to the Engineering Society of Detroit. I'm from the Detroit area. And at the Engineering Society of Detroit, they had all kinds of films they showed about animals and about life. And so that nurtured my interest in science, which I've always had. And my dad's background was chemistry, and he developed the periodic table, which you see in colleges throughout the world. Although he developed a form of it, he got a patent on when the patent expired, and everybody else copied it. And so he kind of lost the business, but I still go to a university which has the old charts that are 50 years old. Some that I recognize there's my dad's periodic table. So I grew up with that, and therefore I have a strong interest in the elements and what they do. And my dad brought home from the university bottles of elements of mercury and tin. And so I learned very early about all the elements, and I just did well in school because of that, well, I had a lot of training at home. And so that's my background. And I think there's a certain personality of people who are interested in science, and it's in my genes. I was born that way, so I have that interest.
Amen. You were designed and front loaded with that interest, and I am thankful for that, because Jerry, the body of Christ, everybody has different interests, different skills, different things they want to focus on. And so, like you said, we all complement each other. Like you and your wife are a good team. She has important things she focuses on, and so do you. And they all come together for the good, for the truth, brother.
That's true.
So I appreciate your work. I've got all of your relevant links for people to check out right here. Check out Dr. Jerry's books. You can also get them on Amazon. Here's your biography, and also these articles that we discussed during this show. I encourage people to go check those out and read those in detail. And so, okay, Jerry, I appreciate your presentation to the audience. Thank you so much for tuning in. Share this content around, because the truth is important, and we want people to know that it really is a great time to be a biblical creationist. And so God bless. Standing for Truth is out.